we also want to get out of here. So welcome everybody. It is June 4th. We are holding our CVTA Regional Priority Subcommittee meeting, and we will, thanks everybody for being here, and we will take roll. Ms. Mueller?
All right, sorry, I'm with you now. Here we
No
go.
worries.
Okay, are we doing the roll call?
Looks like we, do you think we should? I think we've got.
Let me check one last time before I
Okay.
call it. It looks like we have a quorum.
Cool. Roll call it is.
All right. Charles City County, Miss Russell. Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Chair Walker.
Here.
Richland County, Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Vidunas.
Oh yeah, where's Joe? He's not here yet.
Oh, he is not. Henrico County, Mr. Yor.
Present.
Miss Smidler. New Kent County, Mr. Stouter. Miss Leduc. Powhatan County, Mr. Chardine. Mr. Pompey.
Here.
City of Richmond, Miss Clark.
Here.
GRTC, Miss Torres.
Here.
Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Present.
DRPT, Mr. Brule. Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
VDOT, Mr. Mann.
Here.
And Mr. Riblet. Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, so we'll get rolling. Hopefully Joe will join us in a few. I know he's planning to attend. Okay, rolling down the agenda. Let's see, roll call. Any amendments to the agenda today? Nope. Okay, so I can move on to, let's see, approval of our last meeting. We last met April 30th, which was a few weeks ago, and we need to approve our subcommittee meeting summary. Can I get someone to help me out with that?
I will make a motion to approve the summary.
Thank you, Barb. Do I need a second? I do, right?
Todd, you're Henrico, second.
Thanks, Todd. Everybody in favor of approving our April 30th meeting summary, say aye.
Aye.
Hearing anybody opposed? No, we are good there. Any public comments before we get started?
We have not received any.
Thank you. All right. Let me share my screen and get us rolling. So I want to share, I always do the screen two, and I hit share. Oh, y'all don't want to see that. And I come here. All right. I got to get my boxes with y'all's faces right. There we go. All right, so June 4th was our meeting. This is our 6th meeting. We last met May 30th. Again, our goal, define an objective process that considers benefit and cost. And today we will be focusing on prioritization measures. Again, I'm trying to get us out of here, maybe, hopefully, hour and a half. That's my estimation. Going over prioritization measures, we want to revisit regional eligibility criteria. There's been some discussion at some of the meetings, some concerns over the eligibility criteria. So we just wanted to circle back and revisit our approach to criteria, establishing the criteria. So for the regional bucket. And then real quick, I revamped the schedule, and we can look at that pretty quickly. So kicking us off, where we left off back in, what is it? Yeah. Hey, that's is it April? May? Gosh, I can't remember. I'm already losing it. At our last meeting, we left off, we had finalized our criteria, and we were trying to work towards how we were going to measure benefits for our regional bucket of projects, and then we would divide by costs, and then we would take that score and rank the projects. Chet and his team in parallel are working on the long range transportation plan, which also has a bunch of projects, defines regionally the projects from the long range transportation plan perspective. So they were in the process of scoring those projects. So what we decided at our last meeting was we would wait till we would come up with a set of test projects. We would wait for Chet and his team to finish the long range transportation plan scoring, which they're using a smart scale, what I call modified version. They have their own data sets, and some of the measures are different, and some of the data sets are different. But we all agreed at our last meeting that it made sense to use that process as our starting point for CVTA, since Chet and his team already have all these tools, and they would likely be the ones, or will be the ones, moving forward scoring projects, at least at this point in time. So it made sense to start with their process and see if it made sense for the purposes of CVTA regional pot. Everyone's familiar with Smart Scale. We all have our understanding of it and some concerns about. One of the bigger concerns with Smart Scale and some of these scoring processes is when you compare across project types. And so what we talked about as our approach for CVTA was two major things. One way to be able to compare apples to apples is to take that benefit divided by cost, that score, and then rank those scores within silos by project type. So we would rank bike ped projects, we would rank highway, and then group transit, rail, intermodal all in a bucket and rank them by project type. And that was one way to make use of what Chet and his team have worked on, but maybe mitigate some of the concerns about comparing across project types. So ranking by project type. And then the other thing we talked about was similar to the I-81 corridor improvement plan that VDOT did, was to select the most applicable measures for each project type. So what they did with the I-81 corridor was they had all highway projects. I think they had like 100 highway projects that they had identified, and they needed to figure out what order to fund them. And so they looked at all the measures they used for Smart Scale and were able to pare them down to just the measures that provided a discernible difference so that you could sort them and rank them. And because they were all highway projects, they're more homogeneous than they are different. So they only needed 3 or 4 measures to be able to compare projects. So they pared down their big list of 14 measures in Smart Scale just to 4. They had 1 safety measure, 1 congestion measure, and 2 accessibility measures. So these 2 main approach steps is what we had talked about considering for the CVTA scoring process. And we had asked everybody to submit what they felt were the top 3 regional projects, and we were going to use those projects as our test cases. So we had to modify that list a little bit, and we ended up with the list that's in the table up above to the right. Again, it's a non-binding list. We're just using this to test out our prioritization process. And we ended up with 15 projects, 11 highway, 2 bike ped, and 2 transit. And I want to make note, there were 2 bridge projects, the Mayo Bridge and Boulevard Bridge, replacement projects and rehabilitation projects that were also submitted. So I don't want to forget about those. Those are not in this test case list because the long range transportation plan didn't score and rank bridge projects. So we'll have to come up with a scoring methodology for CVTA for those types of projects. And so today, where I want to pick up is Chet and his team knocked out the scoring for the long range transportation plan, the universe of projects, and these projects, obviously, our test projects were part of that, and we are going to take an overview of the scoring results for these 15 test projects. It's a lot of information, so I tried to boil it down just to quickly pull out some insights that I think support these two steps of our two-step approach that we have to the left defined. So we'll take a look at those, and then what I propose for the next meeting is to dig into some test scenarios that test the ranking by project type and what measures are most applicable. So, and then it might be worth looking at normalization. That's part of the scoring process, is to normalize the raw scoring results against the highest performing measure or project. And then there's weighting adjustments we can consider. And then we've got to talk about how to rank bridge projects. So we could use the condition. There's that structural report. I'm not calling it by the right name, but Sulab knows what I'm talking about, where it has all of the bridge conditions, structurally deficient bridges. We can consider traffic volume. Maybe we score and rank bridge replacements and rehabilitation as a separate category or within the highway project. So we've got to figure out how to insert bridge projects into the scoring process. So we'll revisit that stuff at the next meeting, but I wanted to give you guys a first look at the scoring results that just came out for these test projects and get you guys thinking. So that was a lot. I'll keep rolling to the next slide. If anybody has questions, I can field that now. Okay. So I'm sure everybody has seen these. Sulab did an update with the long range transportation plan, but effectively here are the 5 measures: safety, mobility, I keep referring to as congestion, equity and accessibility, econ development, and environmental/land use. So they went in and scored all the test projects. And this basically shows you how the steps are. You have these measures. You have the raw benefit for each measure. That's this performance measure value. Then it's normalized. Then there's weighting within each measure. And then there's weighting across the goals. And then it rolls up to a project benefit, divide by cost, and you have a score. So what I did as just a first blush that I want to show y'all is I went into, well, let me just show what's in the table. So the long range transportation plan, the reference numbers on the left, the project description is here, project type, and then you've got your measures across the top. What I did was I went into the scoring results and I ranked the projects within each measure, just based on the raw benefit. It doesn't include normalization. It doesn't include weighting. It's just crash frequency scored X and it ranked how it ranks. So by measure, I ranked each project. And then what I did was, you can see I grouped them. So bike ped grouped, highway grouped, and transit. And just for a quick visual reference, we have 15 projects. So the top 3 projects, which is what, 20%, the top 20% is ranked in green, 1, 2, and 3. Then the next 2 projects, 4 and 5, which would get you to a third of the project, the top 5 projects are in gray. And then if a project did not score any benefit in a particular category, it didn't score any benefit, it was 0, it didn't get ranked and it's highlighted yellow. So, and I just included the weighting up top. Again, the weighting isn't included in this analysis. I just wanted to give you, you can see how the measures were weighted. So, some overview things that quickly pop out. So for bike ped projects, and I don't think anything is surprising here, they did not score well. So we have 15 total projects, and you can see across the board when compared to and ranked against other projects, highway and transit in our subset, they did not score well. They scored in the bottom third across all the benefits. So one thing to consider, which we've talked about, is knowing Fall Line Trail is an important project. If we were to manipulate the measures, we'd have to go into all these measures and figure out, or the weighting, and try to figure out what we could do to make it compete with highway or transit. But our proposed way to kind of mitigate that we think is a effective way, given the resources we have, it's credible, dependable, is just to rank projects within each project type. So don't compare a bike ped project with Widening 64, and just rank them within each project type. For transit, the 2 transit projects we did, down Route 1 from the Central Business District up Parham and then out 60 to Chesterfield Town Center, scored really well in equity and accessibility, which is intuitive, I think. That makes sense. And then it scored well, I would say in the top 5 in one of the safety measures, top 5 in one of the congestion measures, the delay measure, and then environmental and land use scored well. So transit, I think, across the board is gonna score well. Highway projects, this one was a little bit, in terms of what popped out just on raw benefits. What I took away was, if you look at what were the measures that you can quickly pull out where they scored well across the 11 highway projects. So if you look at crash rate, the top 5 projects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are all highway projects. And the same thing for delay, 1, well, not quite top 5, top 4, 1, 3, 4, and 5. So I think that the goal of a highway project to move people and products safely, these 2 measures, that kind of made sense to me. That it's all over the place, though, to be honest. But equity and accessibility, some 4s and 5s, but transit definitely outscored highway projects in terms of accessibility. And then one more summary, and then I'll kind of open it up. It's a lot to digest. So going back to our approach, we said, let's look at these measures and try to figure out which ones are most applicable by project type that give us enough of a difference to rank projects. So just kind of going through these measures, similar to the I-81 corridor example, highway projects, I think it's the core measures, which is what they did on the I-81 project. For highway projects, safety, mobility, and accessibility seem to be good measures, for core measures for comparing and contrasting highway projects. We would need to figure out for bike ped, transit, and other types of projects, what measures, all of these measures, some of these measures, obviously equity and accessibility are good for transit. Bike ped didn't particularly score well in anything. So that's a question. But as far as testing, economic development, if you look at economic development, You can see here how connection to truck intensive areas and truck throughput, the two truck centric freight related measures. Bike ped obviously didn't score, transit didn't score. So it favors highway projects. I think this could be considered redundant or maybe not necessary in that it's very similar in ranking to mobility. So you've got truck throughput versus person throughput. And you can see the rankings are very similar. So I would propose that maybe we didn't need the truck measures under econ development, which for the long range transportation plan, it made sense because freight is a big part of the goal of the plan. So that's why it's in here. But for our purposes, this may just be a bonus measure, if you will. Job growth. Does this overlap with access to jobs? So if you build this project, here's how many existing jobs are accessible. If you build this project, here's how many of projected new jobs are accessible. So that might be considered overlap, or again, maybe not needed to be able to compare. So maybe economic development can go. Again, I'm just throwing out ideas. And then lastly, environmental and land use. So sensitive features is essentially a measure of here's where your project is located. You draw a buffer around your project and it overlaps with some sort of predefined environmental feature. And then the more overlap you have, the less points you get is how I would say that very quickly as a summary. And it seems like, and then vehicle miles traveled, obviously, if you increase vehicle miles traveled, I believe you would have a negative impact on the environment. I'm dumbing this down for my own purposes. So I think with environmental, you have to mitigate your environmental impacts with every project. It's built into the project development process. Because these projects are so regional, should, I-64 widening be above or below another highway project because you have to mitigate for some sort of environmental impact? I would think that the core purpose or the bigger need is that you need to move people safely. Not that environmental is not important, but it's built into the project development process anyway. You have to figure that out. So, and then lastly, connection to activity centers. And this is literally, defined activity centers in the region. And with this project, you're making that activity center more accessible. So is there an overlap with accessibility to destinations? Again, important, but maybe it supports land use decisions. The project would support this type of land use and development. But we do have an accessibility to existing, to destinations as part of this measure. So maybe it's overlap. That was a lot. What I guess to the group, and so what I was proposing is test scenarios. I would come back to you guys next week and test some of these questions out by, taking out some of these measures and ranking them again and seeing, intuitively, does it make sense? Is there anything you guys want to add? Because I'm doing a lot of talking and it's should I email this out and you guys can dig some more? Questions, comments, anything you're seeing?
Hey, Chessa,
Yes,
Barb.
hey, Barb.
Thinking about the environmental land use measure, we've talked about this before, and you've already said it. I just want to say it again.
Sure.
The NEP, well, the environmental process prevents us from impacting resources without mitigating. And like you said, for these regional projects, I think that the environmental clearances associated with implementing a project would be the point in time where we deal with the environmental side of the house, rather than have it be part of this evaluation. Especially because even though our group of projects isn't as homogeneous as the I-81 stuff, it's still the regional type of projects, and they're more similar. And yeah, I just think we probably should not include the environmental land use measure there. I am kind of interested to see the freight part of economic development
Okay.
and how that plays into it, thinking about regional projects.
So for example, with the freight, and I'll open it up if anyone wants to add on to what Barb was saying, but relative to the freight, you can see here that the 64 widening projects didn't score on because of their designated areas based on truck intensive type land uses, and it's basically a map that highlights these intensive areas. Like down in Chesterfield along Route 10, you've got intensive truck land uses down there, so that's an area. So 64 widening through New Kent isn't near any of these defined areas, so it didn't get any of those points, but it's in the top 5 for safety and congestion measures. It did increase throughput, but you can see here, eastbound was 5, westbound was 4, but same thing with throughput. It scored pretty well on the throughput measures. So
yeah, so would it make sense that maybe we just keep the throughput part?
can do that. Anything else, anybody else on approach or what you'd like to see to be able to buy into these measures? Chet?
Just to play devil's advocate,
Yes.
in terms of the optics of the measures, if somebody outside this group is looking at it, so you've made the suggestion, or the one scenario would be to eliminate job growth and eliminate connection to activity centers because of the overlap with the equity and accessibility category. That would basically mean that, and you said it, we're basing these rankings on safety, mobility, and accessibility. So if someone's looking at this from outside and doesn't see economic development, say somebody from the chamber who's not involved in our process on a day-to-day basis, they might say, well, what's going on here? Why aren't you thinking about economic development? Is it just the optics to say, well, let's take out the access to jobs and use job growth instead, so that you have something in each category? I mean, I don't have an opinion one way or the other. Just curious.
That is a good, and maybe we should back into it if I go to the next slide. Again, these are just the raw measures. It doesn't account for cost. Like if the benefit cost scores intuitively make sense within each category, and we don't think we need to revisit any of this. So let's look at the overall ranking. when you factor in cost. Because if it shakes out the way people think it should shake out, and again, I think we're mitigating a lot of the trail project competing with Widening 64 is kind of resolved by the silos we want to create. So all we're doing with the measures is if we feel like within each category, the projects aren't ranking up the way they should, we should revisit the measures within each category if it doesn't rank the way it should. But across categories, they're all being scored the same, so it's apples to apples. So even if we may have an issue with a measure, they're all being measured the same. So if we have issues with, and because we have a small sample size, our biggest sample size are highway projects, we can take a look real quick. Let's do that. Let's take a look at, this might help. So after we normalize and weight all the benefits and roll it up into one project score. So we had all these benefits. Then we normalized each one and we weighted each one and we roll it up into a project score. We didn't divide by cost. We just have benefits. This is how they shake out. So our top 5 projects, we had 3 highway projects that were in the top 5, 2 transit, and then bike ped performed at the bottom. And you can see here just on benefits, the highest, so like the widening of 64 is smack dab, I would say, in the middle of our 11 highway projects. Broad Street at 95 interchange improvements scored had the highest highway benefits. You've got some interchange improvements that were the next 3, and so on. Now, when you divide by cost, this is what happens, which everyone who submitted Smart Scale projects, everyone tells you cost is your biggest thing, most impactful thing you can control. Well, we can't control it, but most impactful is cost. So here's the cost. Now this is 2030 cost. The long range plan took 2020 cost and grew it to 2030. The yellow one that's highlighted, Joe and I just made that, came up with 75 million. That one didn't have a cost, so we threw one in for the test's sake. We threw in 75 million for the 95 broad and grew it to 2030. So that's why it's yellow. So when you divide your project score by cost and you rank them all together, your top 5 projects are now two transit projects. You have 2 highway projects and 1 fall line trail. So you can see how bike ped is able to overcome, again, cost is very impactful, is able to overcome the last 2. It scored the worst in benefits, but it's in the top 6 now because the cost is, these are the 2 cheapest projects. So it shot to the top. Transit does well across the board. It scores well in benefits. It's lower in costs when you compare it to the highway project. So transit's good to go. It's going to score well across the board. And then the highway projects, so we have 5 projects, highway projects that are 100 or more, let's say. We've got 95 broad, and then we've got these 4. The 2 widenings on 64, Gate and Interchange, and Poet Parkway Extension. 4 of the 5 expensive highway projects, if you go over here, for example, Gate and Interchange was the 3rd highest highway project in benefits. But when you divide by 121 million, it drops down, which, again, it just shows the impact of cost.
Hey, Tessa,
Yeah.
Todd has something to say.
Oh, sorry, I'm just rolling. Hey, Todd. Sorry about that.
No worries. I was just getting in line to ask a question.
Sure.
First on this slide, and then when we can go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
So for the 2 transit projects on this slide, is that capital cost only, or what's incorporated into the cost estimate?
I would think that it's what the locals put in, right, into the long range plan, which should be capital,
Yeah,
right?
I think it's only capital cost.
Hey, Chessa,
Yes.
I think when you put the costs, when you do the benefit cost calculation, I think that is great supporting justification for us prioritizing by category.
Yeah, so here's the by category. So you've got your top, you can see your top highway. So again, Gayton FHW 32 is 64 at Gayton, the new interchange. It scored the 5th highest benefit of all 15 projects. But when you divide by cost, it drops down to 12. But then when you just sort it within the highway projects, it got a little bit better of a bump. So it evened out the fact that it was mixed in with the other project types. Or no, that probably overcame the cost actually. But yeah, I think that the silo, I'm all in on grouping by silo. I'm interested to see what the full authority would think, but I think that is a good approach.
Because we really don't want to be in a position where we're funding a whole bunch of dinky projects, you know, the whole, to me, the whole point of this regional funding is for us to get some of the loser projects that don't score well in smart scale done. You know, they're important, but they're really expensive. So our process needs to be somehow supportive of that.
And that's what stood out to me here was you can see the more expensive projects are, if they want to fund 64 widening, they're going to have to jump all these projects based on the current measures that we have. Now, if we take out some of those other measures and really say congestion, safety, accessibility, I don't know how this will shift around, but it's, and, you know, I don't know if everyone wants to go back and look at their cost and, you know, do we feel like this ranking 1 through 11 for the highway projects makes sense? I mean, hard shoulder running, it's cheaper, it's only 26 million. You've got interchange projects. Again, the widening didn't do well.
I would put more weight in the benefit ranking rather than the benefit cost. Just for the reasons that I just said before, is we have some projects that are really expensive, but they're very important. And you can't just say it doesn't need to be done because it's expensive.
So maybe we give the full authority the 2 rankings because we have to consider costs, right?
Yeah.
Per the code. So maybe we rank by benefit. So they, I mean, not that, again, the widening, and I use the widening because everyone's familiar and, you know, it's in the middle on the benefits, but it drops once you divide by cost. So we could give the full authority, the benefit ranking, and then divide by cost and give them that as well. So they can make a case of why they want to fund what they want to fund. But that gives them some flexibility. It gives them a sandbox of flexibility to work within. They've got benefit costs and they've got raw benefits and they can, and by category, and they can kind of make a case.
Hey, Chet's got something to say.
Sorry, I don't see.
Yeah,
What am I supposed to look
I'll
at?
keep an eye on it.
Okay. Hey,
Thanks,
Chet.
Barb. Thanks, Barb. Well, first of all, I think Todd had a question on a previous screen, but
Oh.
I just had a couple quick points. One, I think it's great to provide multiple data points to the authority, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be looking for a recommendation from the TAC. So even with multiple things, I think TAC needs to be prepared to say, this is what we think you should do. The other point I was going to make, shoot,
That's
I
okay.
forgot.
It'll come to you.
Todd?
While Chet is thinking, related to this slide and the costs, the benefit costs. So I think, and first off, I agree that we should show them both just the benefits as well as the benefit cost. But I think the benefit cost number is helps inform where potentially leverage makes sense. So let's take a expensive interstate improvement project or interchange project. So if you say, well, half of that will be submitted for smart scale consideration, then really what you're looking at is what's the benefit cost based on the CVTA ask. So take Northgate as an example at 121 million. If you run the cost benefit of 60 million, that's going to be very different than if it's the full amount. So I think that exercise helps inform both the TAC and the full authority of where does it make sense to potentially leverage as one consideration.
Maybe our process should really even include,
That's what I was about to say.
yeah, some scenarios of leveraging, where we say, all right, we've got this one project that's $120 million, and this is how it ranks with that total cost. This is how it ranks with half.
And Madam Chair, if I could,
Yes, ma'am, Dorana.
and this is Diana, and I thought early on in the process, we talked about such like interstate projects and like kind of this given amount of or recommended amount that should come from another source. And so I think that leads to what Barb just said and what Todd brought up in regard to the leveraging amount and potentially leveraging requirements in particular, I guess, like project types. I just know we talked on it early on about the interstate and talking about the responsibility of VDOT and again, on these types of roads that go just more than just in our region. And maybe that will help, the projects look different. And it may be that we have to have some tool that the decision makers can have that really where they can input a leveraging amount to help them with the decision making that would then change that cost benefit when they're kind of making those decisions, or some threshold that we recommend to them may be helpful in encouraging leveraging of funds.
Yeah, and I knew we were going to get to this point, and we did talk about that, Diana. There's, like you said, there's so many permutations of what you could do. How do we even begin to define it? A tool where they could play around with it, but you still don't know what it. We could say, like you're saying, if it's not an interchange spot interchange improvement, but more like a 64 widening where it's through the region, and it's over 100, then we assume you're going to go try to get half of this money, and then we rank these. I agree, we do need to figure out some way to account for what we divide by.
Yeah, there was a point where we were talking about, should we only allow 2 or 3 years of, I think it was 2 years of regional money, like if we know we're getting 70 million a year, no project would get more than 140.
And we may need to, we only have one project in our sub. It doesn't mean we don't have more that would be over 140, but.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Yes, Todd.
So to Barb's point, that's probably the proper way to think. if we're doing PAYGO, but as you've heard at the various meetings and subcommittee meetings, that at some point there's the expectation and appetite to bond, which at that point changes the whole scenario.
Everything. Yeah.
Also, and Shane is welcome to jump in, and there was much conversation and some confusion, at least initially, at the TPO meeting yesterday with many of the same elected officials that sit on the CVTA on understanding leveraging in the conversation between RSTP and CVTA. So I think they understand the concept now, but I think trying to get them too far into the weeds of having them try to figure any of that out will be challenging. But I think on the flip side, going through this exercise and having this information to share with VDOT and the state is helpful in maybe starting a conversation on, in order to make this a manageable project to fund, for example, Interstate Widening of 64, then this is where it stands within the ranking for the CVTA. So how much money can the state bring to the table via the interstate funding program and potentially smart scale to collectively fund that project? And I know those conversations are already getting ready to start anyway.
So should the process be we score the projects and we give them the ranking dividing by the total cost, and then everybody uses that to come up with their own number for an ask? I mean,
I didn't understand that. What?
I know, I didn't either after I said it.
Well, it sounded like to me, just
Like a two-step process.
Well, yeah, I was just, you were asking that, once it's ranked, that the locality that submitted it then come up with a leveraging amount or some, format to help change that outlook.
That's
which,
right.
I definitely understand what you're saying, but I mean, for some of the likes of localities that may not, have that leveraging, hence the reason why they scored low on Smart Scale, hence the reason why they're going to score low on here. I don't know how, what that's going to do for those people. And even with the potential of bonding, I mean, we still don't get through. I mean, we potentially conservatively would be at maybe $500 million. And, that probably, you can count how many of those would get done, and not even including some of them want to get done. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how we might address it.
Yeah, I went down that path too. Like, if you had X amount of dollars, how many of these, you can see the running total down here. Is that another approach of, I'm not sure. I'm looking for direction, you guys. It's hard to, what to divide by.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Where should we go from here? Should we?
Well, I guess one of my questions to Sula would be just internally knowing those, the measures and the metrics and the measures that are a part of them. Is there something in there that's driving some of the scores that we should be aware of? Or is this just, and I know we looked at it, but
It's a lot.
trying to keep up. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Because even with the question about or what Barb brought up about the economic development with the job growth rank versus access to job, I guess my question is like, what's the difference? And is there a difference? And I understand what you said, Chet, completely too. I just would literally want to know, is there a difference in those two or not?
Yeah, I can answer that. There's a lot of difference in both. So the job growth basically looks at the jobs in the surrounding. So if there is a lot of jobs within the certain amount of buffer, depending upon the project type, then obviously if there is a change between 2017 and 2045, it captures that. But access to jobs is to each and every location from each and every location. So it doesn't matter. It's basically looking at the access, not the jobs. Whereas the job growth is looking at the actual amount of jobs which is near that vicinity of the project. Whereas access to job is just looking at whether the implementation of the projects within certain time frame allows people to access more jobs or not. So that's totally different measure.
Mhm.
Okay, so job growth is really more related to economic development. I've got this project, nothing's out there right now, but 10 years from now, we expect an Amazon.
Right. And then basically it should be near the project, right? So if it's near the project, similar with the activity centers, it has to be near the population and employment centers. So that's what it means with connection to activity centers. Again, the access to destination is a different thing. So it's basically the same concept of access to jobs, whether that particular project implementation improves any access to destination to people throughout the region. It's not looking at only project which is the vicinity of that activity center, whereas the connection to activity center is basically giving points to those projects which are near the activity center, which is basically downtown, Short Pump area, Chesterfield Town Center, those areas. So it's totally different measures. The only, I think, based on my thinking, the only measure which overlaps in all of this is the air pollution and the VMT per capita, because the air pollution for non-highway modes, it's basically calculated through VMT, whereas for highways, it's calculated through speed, so it doesn't overlap. But that's the only measure which overlaps a little bit. Other than that, I don't think so anything overlaps.
And then, Madam Chair, just looking at the top where you have no normalization, no weighting. I guess I'm a little bit unclear what that means, only in that if there's some like even prioritization in the categories that the commissioners could employ, so this CVTA is really about making sure that the highways are the safest they can be in Virginia, and then there's more to that safety category than otherwise. I mean, I'm just trying to understand, or, it's very important that we, conserve our environment, and this is where, our investment priority is. I'm just not sure if those categories would do anything. And then again, what the no weighting normalization means to what I'm seeing.
Yeah, so there is, at the top of that screen, there was the weighting that would be applied. You go through the normalization process and then you apply this weighting. And we wouldn't necessarily have to use those percentages. And that could be something that Chessa runs through, does some scenarios where those percentages are different. And I was wondering, would we have in the different categories, bike ped, highway, and the other category, would those weightings change? Like we might say, we think equity and accessibility is really important. That should be weighted heavier for bike ped stuff. But on the highway side, we really think that mobility should be weighted higher. So we could even have different weightings by category.
Right. Yeah, for a highway project to say that the environmental impacts are more important than the goal, I mean, it's all, who am I to say? But mobility, safety and mobility, if you add up the weighting, is 40%. Equity and accessibility, econ and environmental are 60% of the score. I mean, environmental is weighted more than the actual moving of people. So yeah, there could be tweaks, and like Barb said, we could weight it by category type. Yes,
Here.
yes, Todd.
So I think that kind of brings us back to the point Chet was making earlier, that the optics to various folks, if we just patently dismiss certain categories for different types of projects, could be problematic. So I like the suggestion of maybe having a unique weighting for each category of projects. So the ones that we know don't work well for trails, for example, we minimize the percentage for those, and the ones that do reflect well for trails for that category, we increase and down the line. Second thing, this was the point I was going to make earlier on this slide, or question. This may be more for Sulab. So for the projects that showed no benefit in a particular category, is that a function of you didn't have data, or it just didn't score based on the specific project?
It didn't specifically score based on the specific project. So let's say connection to activity centers. If it's not within near to any activity center within 2 miles buffer, then it scores 0. Similarly with truck intensive areas, if it doesn't, it's not within any truck intensive area, then it scores 0. The connection to truck intensive areas and truck throughput are specifically, as Chess has already mentioned, it's just for the highways, because for LRTP, the goal is to look mobility for both people as well as goods. And we didn't have any measure which would evaluate that criteria. That's why it was deliberately added. The truck component was deliberately added to give freight projects a little bit of boost. So other projects don't score in that.
And 64 widening, which moves truck traffic regionally across the state, didn't score in this category. It did score here though, throughput.
Yeah, it improves throughput, but it's not near any designated
Right.
truck intensive areas in the region. So that's why.
So, Madam,
And like,
if I could ask a follow-up question to Sulab.
mhm.
So on that same topic, then, if you look at Northgate and under safety, there's no stats there because it doesn't exist, or because of a different reason?
So the concept is that if you add any interchange, there is no crashes now because there's no interchange, right? But if you add an interchange, the CMF actually increases. It's more likely to have crashes. So that's why the safety for that project is actually negative, but we are not using negative, and that's why it doesn't score anything. That's why it's 0.
But if you take the acknowledge that crashes will likely increase if you add an interchange, if you just take that immediate area. But if you take the reduction in crashes at adjacent interchanges as a result of adding this interchange, or reduction in crashes on this case, for example, Broad Street, because you've diverted traffic off of Broad Street, there is actually a safety improvement, and that's not captured. And I don't want to get into the weeds of that, but
yeah,
Maybe it's a wash.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I think based on all the literature review and what VDOT is using for smart scale, that's what it's not something we invented. So we just followed what's already there. So
got you. So we're back to the imperfections of smart scale.
Yeah.
Hey, Sheila, this is Tom Coleman. Same thing. Could you explain why a project would not get a score in VMT per capita?
So if it does not increase its so VMT per capita is basically reduction based on the implementation of the project. The overall VMT is reduced. That's what we are thinking. If it's reduced based on the built condition, then it gets the VMT. If it's not, sometimes a project adds induced traffic, increases VMT. So if we are adding an interchange where there was no interchange, it saves a lot of VMT because people had to take other exit, but now it's saving that. So that's why the VMT for those projects would score good. But some of the highway projects, there might be induced traffic, and because of that, the VMT per capita change might actually be negative, which means the VMT is actually growing. And for those projects, it's basically getting a 0. We are not calculating any negative scores.
But
Okay.
what kind of data could you utilize? Because this sounds like there's some subjectivity there. Is there any objective data that you could utilize to say absolutely there's going to be an impact or not?
We just use the travel demand model. There's no other tool to use for any to know the VMT change system wide to see the impact of a particular project. There's no other tool than the travel demand model, and that's
okay, so that's the answer. It's the data is put into the traffic model, and then the traffic model produces the analysis.
Right.
Phew. Okay, we're at about an hour. Next steps. I need some direction, I think. I mean, I can, let's see, do I need to put together what to test and circulate that? Or, I mean, I don't want to go down a path on what I think I should be testing. I mean, we've got the issue of, so I think we're good on grouping the projects by category and ranking. On the measures, there was some discussion about not wholesale eliminating whole categories, but maybe visiting a particular submeasure.
Can we see if there's support to eliminate environmental and land use?
Okay.
And I'm hoping Chet and Sulabh will weigh in on that too.
Okay. That's out for everyone. What does everyone think about wholesale eliminating environmental?
This is Andrew. I agree with Chet's point. I think the optics of it are a little concerning. I agree with the points that we have to consider environmental as part of the project development process, but I think in terms of the optics, it would be looked upon unfavorable by some stakeholders, I think.
One thing that SmartScale has struggled with is environmental, in that everything else is measuring positive things. And with the environmental, it's sort of backwards. So I think last round was when they've made the first adjustment to kind of address that. So I think even the SmartScale process recognizes that environmental is a hard measure to deal with, but because it is in the legislation, they're required to have it as a measure.
So of the 3 environmental measures, sensitive features, air pollution, and reduction in VMT per capita, any of those? I mean, sensitive features is your project.
Yeah, I mean, we would not say that building a bridge over the James River, if you needed to build a bridge over the James River, just because it's over the James River, which is a sensitive feature, that's the reason you have to do it. You know, I mean, I just can't see penalizing a project that of a regional nature because of that. You know, if I was on a secondary road somewhere where there's an alternate route where I can avoid crossing a creek, then okay.
Right. Because of the regional nature of these projects, I mean, are we gonna not? Again, we're just trying to gather a discernible difference to sort them. These all need to be funded. They're regional projects, they need to get done.
The connection to activity centers is kind of nice, but maybe we can throw that under accessibility.
Well, everyone has an optics concern. We could just leave it there as land use. A land use measure.
And get rid of the environmental part of it.
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
This is Tom again. I mean, I'm struggling to understand how these individual variables are important to the overall score, and I'm just hesitant to tweak and continue tweaking without having an understanding of how that's going to impact the overall score for the projects.
So do you need, do we need to go through each measure one by one and understand it? What do we need to be able to finalize and a measure, these measures? The use of each one of these measures?
Would it help to run different scenarios where we take stuff out, leave stuff in? The thing is, there's so many variables.
Right.
I mean, running different scenarios would be useful, but is that practical?
Right.
Well, we have the raw benefits, so it's all spreadsheet stuff. Sulabakaya. I need that spreadsheet that has the normalization and all that in it. But yeah, I think pulling out measures is easy enough. But what combination of measures do you need to see? It's, again, I was thinking if we think for optics, we need to show an economic development and environmental measure, then it's almost like everyone needs to understand each measure to understand which one to pull out.
Hey, Chelsea.
Or to leave in. Hey, Joe.
Hey, apologize, I'm late to the party.
That's okay.
So, we have grouped these into, I like to call them silos or categories. And so by doing that, I'm asking the question, is the fact that we have some of these factors like environmental land use less important in the sense that everything is relative? So if you look at the two transit projects, they both score off the charts in the EJ category, right?
Mm-hmm.
And compared to trails do very poorly. So if we were grouping everything together, then we might want to revisit how that's weighted. But the fact that, we will be looking at these in separate categories.
Yeah.
We're really just trying to rank them in their category. And so even though environmental and land use doesn't really apply, it's all relative to the other highway projects, for example, that they don't apply to. I said a lot there, but I think everything's relative. And if we separate by categories, that was really the intent all along, we get more of an apples to apples, regardless of what the criteria and the weighting you apply.
Right. And so that's what I was saying. So then it's just, do people have an issue with how they rank within each category? If there's no issue, for example, this column to the far right would be how this subset of highway projects ranks. And if, for example, if they wanted to fund Widening 64, they would have to jump over all of these projects. And that may be what they were willing to do, or then we started talking about leveraging and all that. But yeah, we don't have to spin our wheels running a bunch of scenarios on, some of us feel very strongly that, and remember, VDOT did this with I-81, talk about optics. I mean, they had 100 projects on I-81 that they were trying to fund, and they got rid of environmental land use and just focused on safety and mobility because that's all they needed to sort projects. So I'm not saying, VDOT has done that and had optics on that too, I'm sure. But if only a few of us are comfortable with that and we feel like we could go back to what Joe was saying, and we're siloing them, and as long as we're good with how everything within a category ranks, I mean, we could go and pull other universe of projects examples to have a bigger subset to further see how things shake out within a category. But
Really, Chet had a comment, but I'm gonna
Oh.
go ahead of him.
Okay.
What Joe said makes a lot of sense. It's all relative within the category. So yeah, I'm with you on that. That solves some problems. And going back to the whole idea of we can show them benefit costs, and we can also show them flat out benefits. And of course, we will have to make a recommendation to the CVTA.
Mhm.
But I think looking at it from both perspectives, I think is good. And Chet needed to say something.
Hey, Chet.
I don't need to say anything, but I wanted to say that I think the direction that Joe and Barb are talking makes a lot of sense. If it matters, staff's position is that each of those measures is important on their own. So if there's no need, I mean, if people are okay with what's on the screen right now, at least in terms of a rallying point, then I feel like that's a great direction forward.
Maybe we should look at some bigger chunks in the category.
Right.
And then we can see whether we think we need to fool with the weighting. I don't know. I think I would like it if this committee just asked you to kind of play with the numbers a little and see what it looks like straight up by category, looking at benefits, looking at benefit costs. And then if things look kind of wonky, seeing whether changing the weighting or taking out some measure that makes no sense, except I really do think Joe made a great point with that. So I won't go down that road too much.
I'm fine with playing along, because we could almost prove the point if you were to stay within the category and drop a whole category of measures. Does it really change the order?
It might not.
It might not. And we can kind of, Chessa has done all the work here, but it wouldn't be that difficult to just to run a couple different, I call them kind of like out there fringe scenarios, just to show that, it doesn't really affect things, because I don't think it will affect things a whole lot. But we haven't tested that either. And a larger sample would also be helpful as well.
I was thinking to the larger sample point, we are going to, what I recollect was we all agree that we want to have application limits. I bring that up because if I do 60 projects, they're normalized within each measure to the highest scoring project. They influence each other when you get to normalization. Normalization, they're relative to each other. Weighting isn't, you know what I mean? It's just, so if I have a ton of projects, because like if you were to go in the universe of project list right now, 95 at Broad Street isn't you know, the highest performing highway project, because there's all these other highway projects in there, so. But yeah, I could do a bigger set of projects as well.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Todd.
I thought the sample spreadsheet you had was non-normalized.
Yeah, so, sorry, so this summary was not. You're right, this was just raw benefits. But the project score rolls everything up and includes normalization. So that first big table is just these values for each measure by project. And then it's normalized and weighted. And that's the summary table is the weighted and normalized project score.
Didn't we have some previous discussion regarding whether to use normalization? Because as we've learned from Smart Scale, normalization across the universe of projects submitted each round has a huge influence on outcomes.
Yeah, so that was definitely, I think I'm gonna run that one for sure. So I had run with and without normalization to show the impact. I believe Sulab, you did that as well on your test projects for the long range plan. I don't remember where you ended up. Obviously you're normalized, so maybe it didn't matter for that. But yeah, if you have, so normalization, if you have the impact of normalization, if you have a project that scores off the charts, an outlier is you have a total of 100 points, 100%, and every project is a percentage of that highest scoring project. So if you have a project that scores off the chart, it's going to make all the other scores in that category so small that they don't matter. And now, so for like the tunnel project in Smart Scale was such a big congestion scoring project that it basically made all the other congestion scores so small that you wind up having land use and some of the other measures that were more important because it impacted the score so much that they were so small that the other measures wind up having more importance. So normalization can have a big impact on scoring.
I would anticipate that we would not have that degree of deviation as a result of normalization, but I think it's worth going through the exercise to see the level of impact.
Okay, yeah, I agree. That one's easy. I can do that. All right, so we talked about grabbing a few more projects, maybe, and testing, at least for to satisfy those of us that don't think every measure is necessary. Let us test. Taking some out and seeing if they make a difference. Like Joe said, they may not even make a difference. I don't know.
So let me say something. If we don't normalize, how are we going to get the benefit of the project? It's going to be difficult because
they're all different units.
They're all different units. And
yeah.
So one thing which I tried, because Smart Scale and our process, the numerator, which is the benefit, doesn't play much role. The denominator, the cost, plays much role.
Yeah.
And I tried to do the cost normalization. So you do the benefit normalization, and I did the cost normalization as well, and looked at that. So it changed a little bit ranking, but wasn't a drastic change. So that could be one thing you can do as well. Normalize the cost.
Yeah, I guess if we don't have the same units and we don't normalize, then that is a good point. I guess you'd have to try to equate everything to a common unit like dollars.
Yeah, so that is something we are working on, just to get the raw benefit in dollar values for all measures. And that would be a demonstration for this long range transportation plan because it hasn't been vetted. We're still working on that, but that's work in progress. And that way there's no relativeness. It's
right.
all benefit in dollars and the cost is in dollars, and you just divide it and see what is the actual raw benefit of each project.
Right. Yeah, I forgot that they were all, everything is different measures and that's why different units and that's why you have to normalize. So
There still is the outlier thing,
I could do that. Yeah.
where we suggested if you've got these real extremes, drop them out of the normalization process for the
Then
remainder.
rewrite. Yeah. Okay, so I can do that. I'll review for outliers and if there's any that are swaying a particular measure, I can pull them out and re-rank. And then there is the cost normalization. I didn't think of that. Okay. It's 3 o'clock. I knew this was a lot of, again, to Joe's point, we can go around and around with the measures, but grouping them is going to mitigate a lot of that. So if I was to summarize for next week, I will try to brainstorm with a few scenarios to test based on today's conversation. And we may be able at the next meeting to do away with at least the measures, eliminating measures. I think we should be able to, I can do some looking at that and put that to bed by next meeting. And then weighting, I can test weighting too. So we can come back and look at weighting. I'll look at outliers to see if there's anything there. Now, are we agreeable about, do I need to add some more projects to fill out the sample size for bike pen and transit? Add a few more projects. Okay.
Yeah, if you can do that, I think that would be good.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Todd.
if I recall, didn't we have another category that was like
Intermodal, multimodal.
multimodal?
I should have changed intermodal to multimodal.
Yeah, multimodal, which included everything from park and ride lots, trailhead type facilities that could be used as park and ride lots and so forth. So if there's any projects that you can to run that would be helpful.
Okay, I'll add the multimodal and okay. So I'll do a few things and we'll meet back up next week and revisit this discussion and see if we are further along. I think this is extremely helpful to have the data to be able to, and I dare say, I don't think we're that far off, to be honest. We just have we all have a certain understanding and intuition, and we just want to dig in a little more. I don't think we're that far off.
Hey, Chessa?
Yes.
I wanted to bring up the eligibility discussion that keeps cropping up at the CVTA and at the TPO.
Can you tee it up? Because Joe had a little thing to talk about that.
Okay.
You can tee up what you heard and Joe can tag on to that.
Yeah, there's concern from some localities that they won't have any projects that meet the eligibility criteria. And, this is something this committee talked about early on, the fact that even though we've got this new fund source, it is still limited, especially because at this point, we're not talking about bonding. So, and we have recognized that the process is going to evolve and change as we go along. We need to build that into our process, that we'll review it and revise it as we need to. Yeah, there was, I think specifically the concern had to do with volume thresholds. And I know we took a pretty good look at that with some mapping of volumes. And
I'll hand it over to Joe.
Okay, yeah, so Justin, why don't you pull up the mapping? Go ahead and unclick all of those layers except for arterials and higher. There you go. So we hit, just to refresh everybody, we had basically kind of 4 criteria that we looked at in terms of eligibility. And the first was, arterials and higher, and that's what's shown in yellow. And then go ahead and click the 20,000. Yeah. So then we said, well, let's take a look at that network. And like Barb just mentioned, we looked at a couple different thresholds, 20,000, 30,000, and so forth. And I guess we landed at 20,000. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. I got confused there. Yes, we landed at 20,000. Somebody mentioned arterial preservation network and corridors of statewide significance. Those are going to overlap a lot with the routes that are already shown, but go ahead and click on those as well. And so the resulting corridors that we see mapped is really kind of the pool, or we'll use Sulab's term, that it represents kind of the universe of eligible projects or road segments. So do you have that other slide I sent you with the kind of a breakdown by rurals? The concern really, I think, is from the rural standpoint is, what's available for the rural localities. So I did a quick survey, and in the rurals, you're going to have all of the interstate and primaries, of course, will be eligible. And then there are some other routes. So in Ashland, it's Route 1 and 54, 95 through the town, plus Ash Cake Road. Charles City, for example, is one that we were concerned about, but that actually has 4 primary routes, 5, 106, 155, and 156. All are eligible under the criteria that we've established, and so forth. You can go down the list, but there are several major corridors in each of our rural localities for which projects could be developed and submitted. And this is just highway, okay? Obviously, we have the other categories, and this doesn't consider that, but so a park and ride, for example, like Todd mentioned. But, when we developed this, we were looking at this with an understanding that really this was a regional project pool, and the focus was going to be on projects that were of a regional benefit. We have our local funding, and that funding is primarily dedicated to local concerns. But and we also, there's also the consideration that this wasn't going to be a one-for-one. In other words, a dollar in, dollar out was going to come back to each locality. There is going to be some imbalance in that respect, but it's kind of more of a holistic look at our region and where the needs are at a regional level. And so I feel like we've addressed that. Others may disagree that we have, but I feel like this is a good starting point. And certainly there's no doubt in my mind that we'll come back a year from now or 2 years from now, and we'll tweak this as a group. But I think it's a fair place to start, and I think there is something for everybody, or the potential for something for everybody.
Madam Chair, this is Diana.
Yes.
Just to add more to some of the comment, the comment specifically, I think it said, we would have 1 or 2 routes or eligible roadways with the 20,000 ADT. And I think that it's one thing, when one locality does have 1 and 2 and other localities have 15 or 14 or 15, maybe what some of the issue is. And then secondly, in ensuring that, defining that a roadway does not have to cross multiple jurisdictions in order for the region, for it to potentially be regionally significant. to a particular locality is what again is what was said in the approach in regard to what we are considering as a group as regional. So I think that yes, we were able to come up with a consensus, but even in that consensus, that there was that feedback. And one of the things, again, outside of the 2 roads with the 20,000 ADT, again, was the ensuring that when the way that we're looking at roadways and as regional, again, allowing that flexibility for a smaller locality that may have a roadway that doesn't potentially meet all the criteria but is still considered or impactful to them, and have some regional significance. But so I just wanted to add those in there, in that while I do think our process is sound, those are still some of the sentiments that were said.
Anybody else on? Let's see. Tom, I don't want to call you out, but you're on. You had any comments on eligibility?
Sure. First off.
Yeah, no, I guess.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
Tom. We'll get to you, Todd. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I mean, I guess part of it could be a misunderstanding is that I thought the 20,000 threshold applied to 45, 522 in those roads. I didn't think they were automatically eligible for the duration.
What do you mean for the duration?
Oh, like Route 45 is in the western part of the county. It doesn't have 20,000 trips per day. So it's an arterial network, but it's less than 20,000. So is that eligible or is it not eligible? My understanding is it's not eligible.
Yeah, so Joe,
Because
when you pulled these, did your eligible list, did you pull the volumes?
No, so I based this upon the mapping, and,
Oh,
and I based it upon the mapping. So if the mapping is not showing that, then
because it should be,
that's a great point. So
it's a
I
part
took it to be,
it doesn't meet the volume is what, yeah,
correct.
yeah.
does it have to meet all 4? But
Yeah, so we had a 2-tiered, we said it needed to be an arterial with equal to or greater than 20.
then plus arterial preservation network. Now, does the APN need to carry 20,000?
Well, I don't remember if we settled on the arterial preservation network in COSS. We talked about it. But the volume threshold needed to be met. So even if we said arterial preservation network in COSS was a requirement, it still would need to meet the volume threshold, is how I understood where we were going with.
Yeah. So
If you look at the layer, the arterial preservation network, everything on that is over 20,000. So we could just turn that off.
Same thing with COSS. Right. That just confirms that
Yes.
arterial preservation network in COSS, the 20,000 covers those corridors as well. So I think, Joe, you were looking at these are all the arterials in the region.
yes,
But these are the ones with 20,000 a day on it. The gray.
No, for Goodson, for example, the arterial preservation network that may have that for most of that, that's going to have 20,000. But outside of that, none of them are going to carry 20,000 or even close to it.
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah, Chess, I was wrong. I had the wrong thing checked. There's some APN and some COSS that aren't greater than 20,000.
Okay.
So my apologies to the group if I'm misinterpreting this. I took the map to be inclusive of 20,000, and it's not. So
That's blue is 20,000. That's arterials are higher, right, with 20,000. So to Tom's point, yeah, they've got, what is this? This is 6, River Road, Patterson, a little bit.
Correct.
Yeah. You
Correct.
got.
But clarify,
That's close
so
to what I was
greater than 20,000, can somebody answer this question? Is that for any route, or is that just on arterials?
The criteria is it has to be arterial and it has to have 20,000 a day.
I guess what I'd ask staff then, if they could prepare a map that had arterials plus 20,000. As opposed to, it's difficult to work with them as individual layers.
I mean, it's
I don't want the arterials if they don't meet the 20,000. And I don't want just 20,000. I want 20,000s that are also arterials or higher.
Okay. Yeah.
I think part of the discussion last time was automatically including the arterial preservation network. I thought that was part of the discussion.
Yeah, I did too.
But that doesn't benefit you, Tom.
Yes, it does. It does. It extends Patterson Avenue in particular.
It extends what?
Yeah, if you click off, bring in the southern piece. Yeah.
But you already had 20,000 there. Okay, you get this little piece through the interchange. Yeah. Again, we're not to revisit the eligibility. I mean, it's a concern I can understand, but there are regional projects. So Goochland, you guys have Oilville, interchange, and what's the other interchange? What is it, Ashland? And then you've got 2 interchange projects. You've got 2 hard shoulder running projects on 288. I mean, you've got regional projects that are pricey that regionally benefit a lot of people.
Something else that I think us on the subcommittee need to convey to our CVTA members is that, I know my neighbors, they don't really even know where the county line is, so we get all hung up on our county boundaries, but people use roads outside of our counties who live here. Chesterfield people use the downtown expressway, and there's a benefit to Chesterfield residents to making improvements to roads that aren't necessarily in Chesterfield. And that applies to every locality. Joe put it so well a few meetings ago, when you think about regional projects, what really stands out as regional? Trying to get away from your jurisdiction boundaries. And, you think about 95, you think about those kind of projects. Those to me are top regional projects, and they don't necessarily fall within every jurisdiction's boundary.
Yeah, and I think if we were to use a lower threshold, we would struggle to move what I will say is more, they're all regional, right? It's just some are more regional than others. And if we lower the threshold, then it will be siphoning off even more of that regional pot money. And they're, like Barb said, we all benefit from these regional routes, whether they're in our county or not.
The more regional,
The
just
more
like you
regional-
said.
the
Yeah,
more regional, yeah.
we got plenty of regional, but there are some that are more regional than others.
Right. Okay.
So,
Well-
Chess, I don't want to extend this longer than it needs to. Joe had asked about greater than 20,000 just arterials, I believe.
Yes.
We can get to that from the screen, from what we have.
Okay.
Can I share my screen?
Sure.
Okay. So if you look at this, everything in green is greater than 20,000 and all the blacks are the arterials. It looks like the only thing here, whoops, that is not an arterial but greater than 20,000 is Cox Road. And then there's one little section down here in Chesterfield, 7225. Everything else that's over 20,000 is also an arterial. So it seems pretty solid. If that's the threshold.
Yeah, I think the message is to get that message out that we have this threshold, but they're regional routes that they're more regional and that there's a benefit to all of the counties. Yeah. So.
I guess I think that picture just the optics are, and I think we understand, you know, the concentric circle and increase and decrease, or the increase in the decrease in traffic, decrease in population as we move away from the urban center. But that doesn't change the optics. If you look at those maps, the rural counties are not going to have a lot of green. So it doesn't appear regional in nature.
What do you mean it doesn't appear regional in nature?
Well, if you bring the map back up, most of your projects that we're talking about are going to be in your urban core, in your suburban core that is in close proximity to that. As you look out to Powhatan, Goochland, New Kent, and Charles City, you're not going to have a lot. It's not that you don't have any green, but you don't have a lot of green. Just the optics of that would say that it doesn't appear to be regionally balanced.
Well, yeah, but we're not trying to do regional balance. We're trying to address regional needs. So, you know, if you take it to the very extreme, everyone would agree that 95 is an important roadway in our region, right? I mean, you can't get much more regional than 95, for example.
There's no argument on the numbers. The numbers, I don't think there's any argument with the numbers. I think if you look at that picture and you look at the green, there's just not a lot of green in the rural counties.
I think that's more just.
And they are contributing to the 35% pool.
Todd has something, Chessa.
Oh, I'm sorry, Todd. I'm sorry. Yes, Todd.
Yes, this is Todd, not Tom.
Sorry.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Just for, and I know we did this before, but briefly, can we turn back on the arterial preservation network and corridor statewide significance and see what else we pick up? So we pick up all of 250 through Goochland. We pick up all of 60 through Powhatan, beyond where it drops off to 20,000. I didn't see what else we picked up in New Kent or Charles City. The reason I'm asking for that is, you know, in light of the discussions at the CVTA and the discussions amongst the county administrators and city. I think there's the expectations that all the rurals have at least an opportunity to submit applications for regional funding and let the selection process figure out what gets funded and when. But I think within reason, if we can be more inclusive, so maybe it makes sense to beyond the 20,000 threshold, include arterial preservation network and corridors of statewide significance is potentially eligible. I'll throw that out for consideration.
I think that would be helpful.
And without going back to listen to previous meetings, I feel like we might have talked about that. Like,
Yeah,
like, did we decide that already?
We
I can't
didn't.
remember.
We did talk about it. I thought, I'm not sure how we landed, but
yeah.
And this is Diana. Yeah, I too thought we had agreed on the APN and the COSS to be included. But I mean, would it be that I don't know. I would it be for the larger or more urban areas that the threshold be applicable and it is lessened for the rurals? Or is there I only see there's only so many roadways in the rural areas that I can, well, I guess those are only the arterials that are showing up. So those black area, what are those black areas that are highlighted on the map that we're looking at now? Are those
the black are the arterials? The green is
ineligible.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They're not over 20,000
mm-hmm.
in volume.
I'm okay just including arterial preservation network and corridors of statewide significance without the volume threshold. And not differentiating between, some rural locality versus the urban or suburban, just including them.
Yeah, but that only got like a little dot or two. But I mean, yeah, definitely on whatever consensus, but.
It reminds me a little bit of arguments that we made in the smart scale development process when the Richmond region was saying, just because we've not screwed up our network, don't penalize us for it. So, in a way, even though those sections of those roadways don't have the volumes, they should still be able to compete for some money if there are some improvements that'll keep them functioning well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you look at New Kent, they only have a few lines, but they have 140 million in need. It's because of the type of road that green line is. Same thing in Goochland. You guys have 2 interchanges and 2 hard shoulder runnings that are all added up. It's pretty good need. In 60, in Powhatan, I think Charles City is admittedly probably in terms of having a direct project in their county, they benefit from 95 and 64 in terms of users using those facilities. But just because the lines don't look like you have we would have to have the green lines be really fat according to the need to show it visually. Because if we just say it doesn't look like there's a lot of green lines, well, there's a lot of needs on those green lines that are more regional in nature than the lines that are just black, is what I would say. But I'm good with COSS and APN too.
Do we need to take a more formal vote on that, or?
I have no idea. Do we?
For this,
Yeah.
can I throw out one more thought?
Sure, you got 9 minutes.
It will only take about a minute. This
Okay.
is, it would be interesting to take the universe of projects from the LRTP, all 243 of them, and considering, what we're looking at in terms of eligibility, how many of those 243 would actually meet the eligibility threshold?
Okay,
Something that
that's good.
staff
Yeah.
could derive fairly easily, or is that going to be, you basically a manual exercise?
I can do it, don't you worry. And if I can't, I can call someone.
Because that kind of really gets at the heart of the question is are we being, how limiting are we being here? We have identified this universe of projects for the region. Have we throttled it down too far that we've only left ourselves with a couple dozen eligible projects, or is it 70, 80 eligible projects or more? Or,
I like that. And that might help with some of the leadership if they can see this threshold equates to all of these needs, and this portion benefits you directly in terms of your locality and adjacent and all that.
So what I would suggest before we formally vote on it is let's just kind of collectively agree on what we want to look at as the threshold, and see how many projects we get out of that.
Okay, that's a good idea.
And I guess I'll put it out there is essentially what we talked about would be arterials carrying 20,000 or more.
Yep.
Plus arterial preservation regardless of volume, plus corridor of statewide significance regardless of volume, regardless of classification. That would be the eligibility threshold, and then screen the 243 against that. And what does the pool of projects look like?
And I'll do that with all the project types as well. So if there are regional trails and park and rides and beyond just highway, we had other regional eligible projects. I'll group them by type for you though.
That's a suggestion. If anybody disagrees, feel free to.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe, this is Dirana Chessa.
Yes.
The only thing I was saying about in the chat about that idea was that we still have to remember that the universe of projects list was really only as inclusive as the localities that submitted projects. So while I think it is probably a good process or for us to see, just on some of those localities that may not even submitted any chat. I don't know if every locality submitted a project or not, but again, that is one caveat to that listing is only as inclusive as a locality would have provided those projects to the TPO.
And it's probably not regional if they didn't. I mean,
yeah.
I mean,
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a good test. Let's see what it looks like. If it's not too difficult.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that's a good idea too. 5 minutes. A lot of good discussion. Schedule-wise, I just wanted to point out, I think at the last update to the full authority, we said August for our regional organization process. So we have 2 more meetings, I think, in June. I was thinking that we would want to have our process consensus on our general scoring process by the end of June, and then July work on loose ends of the document, not loose ends, but the document and whatever, we still have to finalize number of applications, some of the loose end stuff, but take July to get that done so that we meet the August cycle of meetings with finance and TAC and full authority. So it can start working its way through work through in August, and then I guess take action September or October, September. So,
Madam Chair.
yes, Todd.
Yeah, at the CVTA meeting on Friday, in the TAC report, when asked, I did say August, because
Good.
Barb held up 8 fingers if I counted correctly. So,
She didn't hold up one.
she did not.
That's good.
My question, and this is maybe as much for Chet, there seems to be some anxiousness amongst some of the CVTA members to see some form of more detailed, maybe a progress report. I don't know if that's something that perhaps at the July CVTA meeting or even June, we can maybe give a very brief kind of, this is where we're going, this is kind of the big picture, as opposed to it just being the black box, because they seem to be a little concerned about that.
Yeah, so like an outline of here are the things we've talked about and where we've gotten consensus, and these are the things we're considering at the moment. I think I know where you're getting at, kind of a little more deep.
I think that would be helpful. That might allay some of the concerns as were brought up at the CVTA meeting last Friday regarding the eligibility, for example. So if things we're pretty comfortable with, maybe we can give them that progress report. I'll defer to Chet to see if he feels different.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, the way to do that would be through the TAC report, but we can certainly work up the agenda. I guess what I'd like to know is, do we want to do that in June or in July? Probably, I mean, if we did it in June, then we would just have the one meeting next Friday beforehand. So maybe, because we're scheduled right now to meet the same day as the CVTA on the 25th.
I would say maybe for the June meeting, we can give them a summary of the eligibility. That seems the point of discussion, and I think it sounds like we're mostly good with that at this committee level. And then July, we will give them more information regarding the process.
Yeah, I think that's great. We can do that. Oh, sorry, Chet, I spoke for you.
I think that's great. We can do that.
All right. 1 minute. Y'all are awesome. That was good discussion. I'm still, I think I'll sync up with Joe, Chet, and Sulab on next meeting. But yeah, lots to talk about at our next meeting. So it should be on, I don't know, is it on everyone's calendar yet for next week? But
Should be 1:30 next Friday.
okay. Have a good weekend, CVTA rock stars. Appreciate
Thank you very
you.
much.
Thank you. Good job.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good weekend.